Most people don't realize it, but the little details in your home can make or break the entire design. From furniture placement to lighting to rug size, these small decisions add up, and when they're off, your space just doesn't feel right. So today, I'm breaking down the most common interior design mistakes people make, and more importantly, how to fix them. Okay, so mistake number one is pushing all the furniture against the walls. Now, a lot of people think pushing all the furniture against the walls makes the room feel bigger, but what actually happens is the space becomes stiff and empty in the middle, like a dance floor that no one's using, right? It disconnects the furniture, ruins any sense of intimacy, and turns your living room into what is basically a waiting room. Okay, so here the sectional is awkwardly locked in the corner, and the person sitting by the windows there can't even see the TV. And overall, the setup just feels really tight and maze-like, with everything pressed into the walls with no actual breathing room. Now, this room might be even more perplexing, right? We've got two couches that are kind of facing each other, but they're still way too far apart for any sort of conversation. And so the overall room just feels cold and disjointed in a very confusing kind of way. Okay, in this room, the sofa is pushed flush against the wall, but it doesn't even make sense to watch the TV, right? If you haven't noticed, the TV is this Halloween looking thing on top of the fireplace here. It's already way too high up. It looks like it's going to get chopped by the mirror, but then the sofa can't see the TV. And also, why are the front legs of this sofa not sitting on this rug? I'm not going to get into that, but just really poor placement in this room overall. And so instead of feeling open, it just creates this long kind of hallway effect with no warmth to it at all. And then here again, all the major furniture is stuck to the walls, but it creates this big dead space in the center, right? It looks like they're trying to achieve openness, but instead everything just feels far apart and disconnected. So what should you do instead here? You want to float your furniture, which means that not everything is pushed against the walls. Even with limited space around the perimeter, pulling the seating inward creates a much more intentional and intimate conversation area. Then you can use a rug to ground the space, just like how the circular rug here connects the coffee table, the ottomans, and the sofas into one unified zone. Right? It just visually ties everything together and prevents the room from feeling empty in the middle. And then you can also create a focal point. So in this case, it's the coffee table with the greenery that draws your eye to the center, while the symmetry and the soft curves keep the room feeling balanced and calm. And so overall here, the whole layout feels purposeful, not just like furniture that's been randomly lined up against the edges of the room. All right, so moving on to mistake number two, poor lighting. Right? You've heard me talk about this 1,000 times. Lighting makes or breaks a space, but most homes rely too heavily on one harsh overhead fixture. It flattens everything, casts weird kind of shadows, and makes your living room feel like a dentist's office instead of a cozy retreat. And so without layering ambient, task, and accent lighting, the space either looks too dark or too sterile. And that means that it lacks dimension, warmth, and any kind of mood. So here, even with natural light coming in from the windows, the fireplace wall still feels dark and underlit because the windows don't go all the way to the end. So at night, this room is going to feel dull because there's no cozy task lights or accent lights in place. Now, if we twist our perspective around here, you can see that there's still no visible lamp or side lighting, which leaves this living room area also feeling flat and lifeless. And the dining area is going to be too dim as well because we're only dealing with this single overhead light, which means that you get this uneven feel in the space that just doesn't make it a space you want to spend time in. And then moving on to this other room, you can see that the light coming from the ceiling fan creates this harsh glow and these awkward shadows on the wall. And because there are no other light sources, the room just lacks softness and depth, even during the daytime like this. So how do you fix this? Well, you want to layer your lighting so that you don't just rely on a ceiling fixture. And in well-lit spaces, you'll see table lamps, floor lamps, and sconces working together to create a warm, balanced glow all throughout the room. You should also use lighting at different heights to fill the space. So overhead lighting for general brightness, mid-height lighting for particular functions like reading or creating a cozy nook, and then lower accent lights to soften the mood. And then you also want to pay attention to warmth and placement, because a soft white bulb in a shaded lamp creates cozy pools of light, while wall washers or undershelf lighting can highlight texture and other architectural features. So the goal is to light for feeling, not just for function. Now, mistake number 3 is using furniture in the wrong size. Because when furniture doesn't match the proportions of the room, everything starts to feel off. If it's too big, then the space gets overwhelmed. And if it's too small, then it feels sparse or unfinished. And so getting the scale wrong makes even the nicest pieces look awkward and just ruins the overall flow of the room. For example, this wraparound couch here is way too big for this space. And as a result, the room feels heavy and overstuffed, kind of like the furniture just swallowed it whole. And so there's no breathing room in here. It's just kind of full of furniture that's fighting for space. But then in this room, it's the opposite, right? The couch, the table, and the rug are all too small for this very large room. And so they float awkwardly in the middle with way too much empty space all around them. And so instead of feeling cozy, it feels kind of bare and underfurnished, as if it's a showroom that's just waiting for more things to get delivered. So the pieces don't anchor the space at all. There's no visual weight. They're just items kind of scattered in a big room. So what should you do instead? Well, you can see here that this seating arrangement is perfectly proportioned, right? The armchairs, coffee table, and the sectional, they all fill the space just enough so things are cozy without being crowded. And this layout shows how symmetry and scale equals balance, because there's breathing room between the pieces, but there's no dead space, and everything just feels right. Plus, the furniture plays off of the architecture, right? The pieces are big enough to ground the room, but they're not so large that they overwhelm it. And so you can still move freely, but also feel connected. And so this is how you scale a grand space without losing its warmth. So multiple seating zones, generous rugs, and well-sized furniture make this room feel really elegant without being overly excessive. So mistake number 4, and this one is super common, is choosing a rug that's too small for the room, right? It might seem like you're saving space or saving money, but it ends up doing the opposite because it shrinks your space visually and makes your furniture layout just feel disconnected. And so instead of anchoring the room, the rug floats awkwardly under the coffee table like a kind of a bath mat in the middle of the living room. So let's look at a few examples. Here, the rug is definitely too small for this living room, and it just creates this awkward scale, right? There's too much exposed floor around it, and it actually ends up dividing the room instead of pulling it together. Now, in this room, the rug sits in the middle with everything else orbiting around it. But the problem is it's too small to define the space or create any sense of unity, and the massive L-shaped sofa just overpowers the rug entirely, kind of makes it look accidental. Here, all the furniture is spilling out beyond the rug's borders, and so it kind of feels like an unfinished setup, as if someone is still waiting for the right rug to arrive. And same problem here, the table and chairs just fit onto this rug, but because it's so small, it just breaks the flow of the seating area and makes this feel more like a mat than a proper rug. So how do you fix this? Well, you want to use rugs that fully anchor your space. Just like what you see here, where we've got this large patterned rug that spans the kitchen and dining area, tying all of these zones together. And even with different furniture styles, the rug connects it all into one cohesive layout. Now, one of the cardinal rules of rugs is that you want to make sure that every major piece of furniture is sitting on the rug, just like you see in this image where these olive chairs and the sofa are all resting fully on top of it, because this grounds the conversation area and creates a cozy, intimate zone that doesn't feel like it's floating in outer space. But keep in mind, you can also layer rugs if you want to, like we see in this image where we've got this fluffy accent rug that's sitting over the flat woven base. And this just expands the footprint of small rugs and adds some softness, texture, and a more intentional layout even when you're mixing materials. Now, mistake number 5 is hanging art that's the wrong size or in the wrong spot. Because we all know art can do a ton to elevate a space, but only when it's scaled and placed correctly. But the problem is most people hang art way too high, buy pieces that are way too small, or unfortunately do both at the same time. And so it ends up floating awkwardly in the middle of a wall or getting lost in a sea of empty space. And so instead of adding character, it just looks really disconnected. And so here on the left side, you can see that the artwork is placed way too high, floating well above the desk setup, while on the right, it's lowered down to eye level and visually connected to the furniture below it, which makes it feel so much more intentional. In this room, the art in the corner is too small for the wall, and it's hung too low. It breaks the visual line of the wainscoting and feels like an afterthought instead of part of the room. And in this room, the artwork is huge, but the seating doesn't match its scale, which makes the room just feel off balance. Plus, the rug barely anchors the chairs, which just exaggerates this mismatch even more. So what should you do instead? Well, you want to match the scale of the wall and furniture that you're working with, because large scale art definitely makes a dramatic statement when it fills the vertical space above a bench, a sofa, or a bed, just like you see here with this oversized piece that's visually anchoring the entryway without getting lost in the room. Next, you want to hang art at eye level and center it with intention. So whether it's a soft textile piece above your headboard or a diptych above your sofa, the midpoint of the artwork should align with the surrounding furniture and not just float awkwardly above it. And then make sure to use art to ground the space, and think of it as part of the composition of the room, not just decoration. So it should echo the proportions of the area around it and create a clear focal point. Think of it as a centered piece that draws you in, ties the elements of the room together, and gives the entire space a sense of balance. So designing a home that feels good isn't about spending more money. It's about avoiding the mistakes that quietly ruin your space. But if you can get the details right on things like furniture layout and scale, lighting, and artwork, your home will instantly feel so much more inviting. So before you go out and splurge on a hot new trend, focus on the basics I've covered here first, and I think you'll be surprised at how much of a difference they can make. And if you enjoyed this video, I've left links to a few others I think you'll like in the description, plus this one up here, which is YouTube's #1 choice specifically for you. I'll see you there.